Cadaver Synod is the battle of a dead pope versus an alive pope. Spoiler alert, the dead pope wins. Cadaver means a corpse or a dead body, and a synod is a council of a church, usually convened to decide an issue of doctrine, administration, or application. The acts of these popes is better understood with the knowledge that the Holy Roman Empire was folding in on itself. There was a lot of chaos at this time, especially in the pope system. This is in the late 9th century in Italy, and the papal system was non-existent, meaning it did not exist. Popes were elected by higher church officials. Church officials were elected by popes. Popes declared the new emperor. Sometimes people were like, "Everyone, I'm the pope," and everyone was like, "Okay." These emperors liked power. They did many things to keep this power. Sometimes emperors would bribe the pope to keep their emperorness in their family. This is important for later. There was a pope named Pope St. Nicholas, not to be confused with St. Nicholas, Santa Claus. Pope St. Nicholas didn't watch children while they sleep. He was born in 820 and beefed with Photius, causing the Great Mini-Schism. A guy named Formosus, who was born in 816 AD, shows up. Formosus in Italian means good looking, but he was not good looking. Not Santa Claus was impressed with Formosus' not to beauty and appoints Formosus to Bishop Cardinal of Porto in 864, being the second of two things Nicholas did as pope. Formosus did nothing as bishop besides being a very good missionary, so nothing as a bishop. He did this nothing in two states, in fact, France and Italy. This upset John VIII. Formosus openly wanted to be pope. John didn't like that. John was double mad at Formosus. Formosus was like, "Oh, no one likes me. I'ma leave." And John was like, "Hey, you can't do that," and excommunicated him. Now we're in 891, 20 years later. Guido Spoleto is crowned emperor. Guido was known for doing absolutely nothing. He was the best decent emperor in all of Italy. Guido was like, "I like having power, and I want this power for my son." And his son, Lambert, was like, "I love you, daddy." So Guido is like, "Hey, Formosus, you should appoint my son to emperor." And Formosus was like, "No, you're a greedy hoe," because Formosus knew that the Spoleto family was corrupt. So Guido was like, "Yes," and Formosus was like, "No," and Guido was like, "Yes," and Formosus was like, "Bye." And then Guido died, and Formosus appointed Arnulf, king of the Franks. And Lambert was like, "What the bro?" And the Spoleto family was like, "You, Formosus. Throw him in the river." The Spoleto family was like, "That's a good idea." The Spoleto family wanted revenge. But then Formosus died. So there was a new pope, Pope Boniface VI. He was pope for 15 days, then died of arthritis' unpopular cousin, gout. Then there was no pope, and everyone was like, "Well then, who's the pope?" And Stephen VI was like, "Well, I want to be pope." And the Spoleto family was like, "Can you help us get revenge on Pope Formosus?" And he was like, sure. So there was a new pope, Pope Stephen VI. And then he died. I'm kidding. He lived 1 year. In his 1 year, Stephen VI and the Spoleto family began plotting their revenge, and they wanted to publicly disgrace him. So they decided to put him on trial for holding a bishop position in 2 places.
That's illegal.
Even though Stephen VI was guilty of the exact same crime. So they began conducting the trial. Formosus was dug up from his grave, dressed in his pope robes, and placed on the stand. Then they got a 14-year-old deacon to stand behind Formosus and speak on his behalf. Then they paid the jury to condemn him, and when it was all set up, Stephen VI spent hours ridiculing him. "This man is too no good." And the deacon was like, "No, I'm very good." And Stephen VI was like, "No, you are not. You are very bad." And the deacon was like, And Stephen was like, "No, you are guilty." And the deacon was like, "But why?" And Stephen was like, "In the name of our good Lord Jesus Christ, shut the up, you stupid dish rag." And the deacon cried because he was 14. And Stephen was like, "So you're guilty. He's guilty." And the jury was like, "Yes." And Stephen was like, "So he is guilty?" And the jury was like, "Yes." And Stephen was like, "He doesn't deserve his pope clothes." Wait, is everyone here? Nah, we're missing Tom and Steve and shit, put the clothes back on. Is everyone here now? Yeah? "He does not deserve these clothes." And then they took his pope clothes again. Then they cut off 3 of his fingers for good measure, and all of his acts were annulled. Then he was thrown into the Tiber River, but then Stephen was like, "Wait, no, I have a better idea." He told them to find the pope from the river, and the people were like, "Bro, what?" But did it anyway. And Stephen was like, "Let's bury him in a peasant's grave." And the people were like, okay. So they buried him in a random plot of land, and Stephen was like, no. And the people were like, "Bro, what?" Stephen was like, "Let's throw him back in the river." The people were like, "Bro, what?" So they unburied him and threw him back into the river with weights tied to his body. Keep in mind, Pope Formosus had been dead for over a year now, and his body was severely decayed. But finally, Pope Stephen VI was content, and he went on to live his pope life. Some people say Pope Stephen said that Pope Formosus' body washed up on a shore and began performing miracles, and then people got mad. Well, first people were confused. They started to realize that their pope was kinda batshit crazy. And after the body of the late Pope Formosus started performing miracles, the people began to get really sick of Pope Stephen and all this trial crap. And they were like, we should start a riot. So the riot found Pope Stephen VI and threw him in the jail. Shortly after, someone strangled him to death. Then there was a new pope, Pope Romanus. Pope Romanus had all of Stephen's acts annulled, and the public was happy, until they weren't. And then they overthrew Pope Romanus in less than a year. Then the next pope, Pope Theodore II, recovered Pope Formosus' body from the river, then died of unknown causes less than 20 days later. So there was a new pope, Pope John IX, who formally reburied Pope Formosus at St. Peter's Cathedral, bringing the end of the terrors of the Cadaver Synod.